there are tumors. And then there's this. A woman wakes up with a strange lump on her neck. Only it isn't a tumor. It's an ancient Native American shaman, reborn in flesh, growing beneath her skin. That's not science fiction. That's the plot. The Manitou, 1978, is one of those films that defies explanation, logic, and even good taste. Based on the 1976 novel by Graham Masterton, this supernatural horror blends pseudo-spiritual horror with psychedelic visuals and a third-act showdown that feels like Star Wars met Poltergeist in a fever dream. The result? A film critics labeled ludicrous, offensive, and utterly insane, and yet it refuses to die. Starring Tony Curtis in one of the strangest roles of his career, the film pushes beyond the limits of genre, taste, and perhaps decency. It doesn't just flirt with cultural controversy, it embraces it. It doesn't just push boundaries, it erases them with laser beams and levitating shamans. But why has the Manitou endured? Why does a movie with disjointed logic, awkward performances, and clashing mythologies still resonate in cult circles today? Is it the audacity, the weird sincerity, or something far more primal hiding beneath the skin? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about. The Manitou, 1978, a film so bizarre, it makes possession feel like the least of your concern. Fact 1. The tumor that wasn't, she didn't have cancer, she had a curse. The opening premise of The Manitou is so bizarre it sounds like parody. A woman develops a tumor that turns out to be the reincarnated form of a Native American shaman. But that absurd idea wasn't invented for shock value, it was lifted almost beat for beat from Graham Masterton's novel, which itself claimed inspiration from real Native American folklore. Masterton, a British writer, admitted that he took liberties with the concept of the Manitou, a spirit essence in Algonquian belief. In actual tradition, each person and object has a Manitou, but the film twisted it into something far darker, a parasitic, vengeful spirit returning through flesh. The screenplay makes almost no attempt to explain this transformation through logic or science. Instead, it leans into dream logic, mystical chants, and eerie medical scenes. Doctors are helpless. The hospital becomes a spiritual battleground. The body is a doorway. What's more disturbing? The film presents this possession as inevitable as though the modern world never had a chance against ancient power. And the idea that something sacred could be repurposed into horror? That was the real infection spreading under the skin. Fact 2. Tony Curtis versus the spirit world. Tony Curtis once said he loved a challenge. This might have been too much. By the late 1970s, Curtis was far from his golden boy days in Some Like It Hot or Spartacus. He was taking whatever roles came his way. When the Manitou landed on his desk, he didn't see it as a horror flick, he saw it as a psychedelic mystery with potential for reinvention. He signed on. Curtis plays Harry Erskine, a phony psychic who becomes the film's reluctant hero. In interviews, he described the role as unusual, but never admitted he found it ridiculous. Behind the scenes, however, crew members revealed he often broke into laughter between takes, baffled by the dialogue and special effects. Still, Curtis showed up. He fought invisible spirits, read fake chants off cue cards, and delivered exposition with deadpan sincerity, even as lasers shot out of fingertips and people levitated. Critics were merciless, but in hindsight, Curtis's seriousness amidst chaos might be what saves the film from total collapse. His performance grounds the absurdity just enough to make you believe, if only for a moment. Was Curtis in on the joke? Or was he the only one who didn't realize how weird this was getting? Fact 3. The real Manitou, sacred or stolen. What's scarier than a horror film that misrepresents a culture? One that doesn't care it's doing it. In The Manitou, the titular concept is borrowed directly from Native American spirituality. But what the film portrays a malicious spirit reincarnated as a vengeful entity is a radical distortion. The real Manitou in Algonquian belief is a sacred life force, not a villain or demon. Cultural scholars and Native activists criticize the film for turning spiritual beliefs into spectacle. Graham Masterton, the author, responded with vague statements about creative license and claimed he was simply inspired by the mysticism, not mocking it. But intention doesn't erase consequence. What's even more unsettling is that the Manitou doubles down. Instead of pulling back from its appropriation, it amplifies it, casting Native actors in menacing roles, using broken ceremonial language, and transforming cultural symbols into horror tropes. One key ritual scene borrows elements from several tribes with no regard for accuracy. Decades later, this hasn't been forgotten. The film is often cited in discussions about the dangers of spiritual commodification in horror cinema. But here's the paradox. Does the Manitou perpetuate misunderstanding, or has it inadvertently preserved curiosity about an erased worldview? Fact 4. The hospital became a haunted set. The scariest thing about the hospital wasn't the monster, it was the mood. Most of the Manitou was filmed on sound stages in California, but the hospital interiors where the bulk of the supernatural action unfolds were shot inside a real, decommissioned medical facility in Los Angeles. Production designer Albert Brenner repurposed the abandoned corridors, surgical rooms, and elevators into scenes of spiritual warfare, but something felt off. Cast members reported constant equipment malfunctions. Lights flickered uncontrollably. One camera reportedly jammed every time a ritual scene was filmed. A nurse consultant hired to lend realism quit after 3 days, citing bad energy. The atmosphere became so unsettling that extras refused to stay alone in the operating room set after hours. One grip even carved a protective symbol into a light rig, claiming he saw a shadow that wasn't from anyone. No official incident ever shut down the shoot. But to those who worked inside the hospital, The Manitou wasn't just a film about spirits, it was a film surrounded by them. Was it all imagination? Or did the spirits resent their portrayal? Fact 5. A final battle? In outer space? What happens when a Native American horror story turns into a sci-fi laser show? The climax of The Manitou is one of the most bewildering sequences in horror history. As the ancient shaman Misquamicus rises in full form, the hospital room literally tears open into a cosmic void. The possessed patient floats, battles rage in psychedelic space, and Tony Curtis fires energy beams from a hospital bed console. This wasn't parody, it was the actual script. Director William Girdler claimed the cosmic ending was meant to represent spiritual dimensions, where Western science and ancient belief collided. But the execution, complete with glittery effects and starfield backdrops, felt closer to a low-budget 2001, A Space Odyssey than spiritual cinema. Audiences were confused. Critics were brutal. One review described it as a peyote trip directed by someone who's never taken peyote. And yet, that ending is what turned The Manitou into a cult film. It's not just bizarre, it's unforgettable. It dares to go where no horror movie had gone before, into a neon-colored cosmos where lasers are sacred and ancient spirits wield interdimensional power. Was it genius? Or just a cinematic meltdown? Fact 6. William Girdler's final vision. He didn't live to see how weird it got. Director William Girdler was only 30 when he made The Manitou, and he already had a reputation as a fast, fearless filmmaker. He directed Grizzly and Day of the Animals, known for their wild concepts and gonzo execution. But The Manitou was supposed to be his leap into prestige horror, a big-budget adaptation with Hollywood names. He put everything into it: elaborate effects, experimental visuals, wild tonal shifts. Some said he was trying to compete with The Exorcist but using folklore instead of Catholicism. Shortly after completing the film, Girdler died in a helicopter crash while scouting locations in the Philippines. He never got to read the reviews, never got to see it become a punchline or a midnight movie staple. That tragedy casts a strange shadow over The Manitou. It was his last film, his strangest, his boldest, maybe even his most personal. A young director trying to tell a story about ancient spirits, only to vanish into myth himself. Is The Manitou flawed? Absolutely. But maybe that's why it still matters. It was a filmmaker's leap of faith, one final, insane spell cast into the void. Fact 7. The psychic was real, kind of. Tony Curtis played a con man's psychic, but the production actually hired a real one. In a move that blurred the line between fact and fiction, the producers of The Manitou brought in a self-proclaimed medium to consult on set. Her name was never listed in the official credits, but multiple cast members confirmed that a woman known as Madame Alira visited during key scenes involving chants, possession, and spiritual warfare. Her job? To ensure that the fictional rituals didn't offend the spirits. She gave feedback on the script's ceremonial language despite it being a mishmash of tribal references. She allegedly insisted on placing protective stones near cameras during the final battle scene. And before the scene where the tumor moves under the skin, she asked for a moment of silence to acknowledge the energy being disturbed. Was she taken seriously? Depends who you ask. One crew member claimed she made people uneasy. Another said she predicted the power would go out mid-shoot, and it did. None of this made it into the marketing. But behind the curtains, The Manitou wasn't just dabbling in spiritual horror, it was living in it. What happens when a fictional exorcism hires a real one? Fact 8. The makeup was too good and too much. Sometimes practical effects go too far, and sometimes they go under the skin. The film's most grotesque scenes involve the tumor, a pulsating mass growing on the woman's neck, eventually sprouting a face, limbs, and even chanting in ancient tongues. To achieve this, special effects artist Tom Berman created a series of prosthetic molds with embedded air pumps and concealed motors. The result? A living, breathing, semi-human growth that bulged, squirmed, and even spoke. It was incredibly effective. So effective, in fact, that it disturbed both actors and studio executives. Actress Susan Strasberg, who played the afflicted woman, reportedly couldn't watch playback of the tumor scenes. Even Tony Curtis, hardly squeamish, called one take the most disgusting thing I've ever seen on camera. Berman later admitted he had to tone down some designs because they looked too realistic, like a fetus clawing out. A few early shots were cut entirely, never seen again. In a time before CGI, the Manitou proved something few horror films dared to. That body horror is most unsettling when it's not metaphorical, it's visceral. But how much is too much when the horror becomes biological? Fact 9. The soundtrack that broke the rules. You can't summon spirits with synths unless you're the Manitou. Most horror films in the 1,970 seconds leaned on orchestral dread, ominous strings, pounding drums, dissonant crescendos. But the Manitou went in a different direction. Its score, composed by Lalo Schifrin, famous for Mission Impossible, fused traditional horror motifs with unexpected electronic sounds and native-inspired percussion. The result was a jarring hybrid, part tribal ceremony, part space opera. Schifrin reportedly clashed with the director over tone. He wanted the film to feel sacred and sinister, while Girdler pushed for something more dramatic, even operatic. In the end, the compromise created a soundscape that confused critics but mesmerized late-night audiences. One music reviewer called it a seance inside an arcade machine. To this day, the score is cited as one of the strangest in horror history, alien, intense, and unlike anything before or after. Some say it undercut the seriousness. Others claim it elevated the film's dreamlike tone. Was it musical sacrilege or sonic genius? Fact 10. The floating nurse scene almost didn't happen. It's the most iconic shot in the film, and it was almost cut. Midway through the Manitou, a possessed nurse levitates off the floor, screaming in a trance as the lights flicker and the hospital descends into chaos. It's an eerie, surreal moment that feels lifted from a dream or a nightmare you can't wake up from. But that scene wasn't in the original script. According to production notes, the levitation was a last-minute idea pitched by director William Girdler after watching Carrie 1976. He wanted to up the psychic stakes. The producers objected, citing budget and time constraints. Girdler fought for it, insisting it would become the film's most unforgettable visual. They gave him 1 day. He got the shot in 6 hours. The effect used a hidden rig and reverse photography. The actress, who had no stunt training, reportedly bruised her ribs during the setup. The crew, however, was stunned by how eerie the footage looked. One even called it the closest thing to real possession I've ever seen. And they were right. Despite the chaos, the shot became the film's signature. It's ironic that the most haunting moment in the Manitou wasn't even supposed to exist. Fact 11. The missing ritual scene. There's a lost scene in the Manitou, and no one agrees on why it vanished. Early drafts of the script included an extended ritual where the native healer, John Singing Rock, performs a spiritual invocation using fire, sand, and chant. The scene was meant to serve as the moral and cultural heart of the film, a rare moment where indigenous belief wasn't reduced to spectacle. But it's not in the final cut. Some say the scene was filmed but removed for pacing. Others claim the studio feared backlash for portraying a sacred ritual inaccurately. And then there's a darker theory, that after filming, a consultant warned the producers that using real elements from sacred ceremonies could curse the film if not handled with respect. No official footage has surfaced, no production stills, no documentation. What remains is a silence that feels deliberate. Was it creative choice, censorship, or superstition? And what did the filmmakers erase, an offensive misstep or a chance at redemption? Fact 12. The actress who regretted it all. Susan Strasberg had seen better scripts. This one made her question everything. By the time she starred in the Manitou, Strasberg had already lived through Hollywood highs and lows. The daughter of famed acting coach Lee Strasberg, she was trained in method acting, steeped in discipline and nuance. Then came the Manitou, a film where she had to lie in bed, scream in agony, and give birth to a reincarnated shaman through her neck. In interviews, Strasberg was diplomatic. She called the film unusual and challenging, but those close to her said she found the shoot humiliating. She had little control over the prosthetics, was given minimal context for the spiritual themes, and felt reduced to a prop. One crew member recalled her, saying, "I trained for Shakespeare, now I'm birthing demons with lasers." After the film's release, Strasberg distanced herself from the project. It's rarely mentioned in retrospectives of her career. And perhaps that's the final sting. One of the few female leads in 1970 Seconds Horror was played by an actress who wanted nothing more than to forget she was ever in it. Did the film fail her? Or did it reflect exactly how Hollywood viewed women in horror, passive vessels for chaos? Fact 13. The film was marketed as sci-fi horror for a reason. It wasn't a horror film. It wasn't science fiction. But the posters pretended it was both. When the Manitou was ready for release, the studio faced a dilemma. How do you sell a movie about a shaman growing out of a woman's neck? The original marketing team considered emphasizing the folklore angle, but feared it would confuse mainstream audiences, so they went with lasers, floating bodies, and cosmic showdowns. The tagline read, "Evil does not die, it waits to be reborn." Posters featured surreal visuals, streaks of light, ominous starscapes, and the tumor glowing with supernatural energy. Some international releases even leaned fully into sci-fi, calling it a film about ancient forces awakened in modern times. The deception worked. Audiences came expecting alien horror. What they got was spiritual possession, cultural appropriation, and body horror. The mismatch led to widespread confusion and walkouts, but it also turned the Manitou into something unique, a film that lured in the wrong audience and then haunted them for all the right reasons. Can marketing save a movie or doom it to cult status? Fact 14. The shaman was played by a real native actor who wasn't told everything. He thought he was honoring his roots. Then he saw the final cut. Felix Silla played the physical manifestation of the reborn shaman, Misquamicus. But the spiritual role, the chants, rituals, and confrontations was portrayed by actor Michael Ansara, known for playing various ethnic roles throughout his career. Though he was of Lebanese descent, still, the production brought in a lesser-known Native American actor for one sequence, a ritual scene cut from the final version. The actor, whose name has been lost to credits, was reportedly told that the film respected Native beliefs and would educate through fear. When he finally saw the finished film, he was horrified. According to a 1980 radio interview, the actor felt used, claiming the ceremony he performed was taken out of context and mashed with visuals that turned his culture into a monster. He described watching the screening with other native guests, most of whom walked out midway through the film. It's a recurring horror in Hollywood, being invited to participate in your culture's portrayal, only to realize you were never meant to control the story. Did the film mean well, or was it just another mask worn by exploitation? Fact 15. The film was banned in several countries. Quietly, you won't find it on the official lists, but the Manitou disappeared in more than one place. Despite its US release, the Manitou struggled with international distribution. The reasons weren't always clear, and the bans were rarely publicized, but film historians have noted that in several countries, the movie was either shelved indefinitely or released years later with major edits. In Sweden, the film was submitted to the National Board but never received a full theatrical release. In parts of Latin America, censors reportedly took issue with the depiction of indigenous figures as monsters. And in New Zealand, indigenous groups protested its screening at a festival, leading to its quiet removal from the program. The studio never acknowledged any bans. They simply chose not to release in certain markets. That silence speaks volume. The Manitou was too weird, too offensive, and too spiritually charged for polite distribution. It floated through the underground instead on bootlegs, late-night TV slots, and cult VHS shelves. Sometimes, a film gets erased not with outrage but with indifference, and that's its own kind of curse. Fact 16. The laser battle wasn't in the script. Yes, the film ends with a psychic laser war inside a hospital. No, that wasn't the plan. According to surviving copies of the Manitou's early drafts, the original climax was supposed to be minimalistic, a spiritual confrontation built on tension, symbols, and ritual. No special effects, no energy blasts, no outer space visuals. But after Star Wars exploded in 1977, the studio panicked. They insisted that audiences now expected spectacle. Director William Girdler under pressure, rewrote the third act to include visual effects despite budget limitations and zero experience with space-oriented cinematography. The result: Tony Curtis firing beams of light, a possessed woman floating through stars, and a cosmic showdown that left horror purists stunned. The VFX were handled by a small post-production team in Burbank. They stitched together borrowed Starfield plates, animated light trails by hand, and layered them over hospital sets. It wasn't convincing, but it was unforgettable. In trying to ride the sci-fi wave, the Manitou abandoned its horror roots and became something far stranger. Did the studio ruin the film or give it the cult legacy it never planned for? Fact 17. The chant scene that backfired. Sometimes horror films summon more than just an audience. One of the most unsettling moments in the Manitou involves a spiritual chant used to ward off misquamacus. The words are never clearly translated, but the sound is rhythmic, intense, and unrelenting. It turns out the chant was based on a real ceremonial phrase but heavily altered. The scriptwriter adapted it from a line in a 1,940 seconds anthropological study, where a healing chant was transliterated phonetically. No cultural consultant verified its meaning. Instead, the syllables were modified for rhythm and made scarier for the film's tone. After the film's release, several viewers, especially those with indigenous heritage, reported feeling disturbed by the scene, not scared, but uneasy. Some claimed the chant felt too familiar. One tribal elder publicly criticized the use, stating, "It's not just wrong, it's irresponsible." Whether the scene actually taps into something deeper or whether it's the power of suggestion is still debated. But if the words were meaningless, why did they leave such a heavy silence? Fact 18. The film was meant to launch a franchise. It wasn't supposed to end with one movie. When the Manitou wrapped production, both the producers and author Graham Masterton envisioned sequels. The novel was part of a larger supernatural mythos, and Masterton had already begun work on follow-up books, including Revenge of the Manitou and Spirit Jumpers. The idea? Turn Misquamacus into a recurring villain, part Freddy Krueger, part spiritual force. Each film would tackle different layers of mythology, elemental spirits, forgotten rituals, ancient curses in modern settings. Graham Masterton even pitched a sequel set in New York City, where technology and folklore would collide in catastrophic fashion. Tony Curtis was never formally signed on, but rumors floated of a return older, more powerful, and more scarred. But then the reviews came in, the box office flopped, the director died. The franchise died before it could be born. Today, the Manitou exists as a cinematic orphan, one film, one weird legacy, and countless what-ifs. Horror fans still wonder, if Hollywood had embraced the madness, would we have a new cult icon, or just more spiritual chaos? Fact 19. A cult film resurrected by bootleg tapes. It didn't rise from the grave, it rewound from VHS. After bombing at the box office, the Manitou quietly vanished from mainstream circulation. Studios shelved it, critics forgot it. Even fans of 1,970 seconds horror rarely mentioned it. But something strange happened in the 1,980 seconds. Bootleg VHS copies, often recorded from late-night TV broadcasts, started circulating at conventions, video stores, and college campuses. Horror collectors whispered about the one where the woman grows a demon from her neck. The grainy visuals and distorted audio only made the experience weirder, like you were watching something you weren't supposed to. Soon, it became a rite of passage. If you were a true genre fan, you had to see the Manitou. Not because it was good, but because it was unlike anything else. Cult status wasn't earned by approval, it was earned by survival. And the Manitou survived on magnetic tape, passed hand to hand, one rewind at a time. Sometimes, resurrection doesn't require faith, just fandom. Fact 20. It inspired a new generation of horror, indirectly. You won't find it in textbooks, but its fingerprints are everywhere. Despite its flaws, or perhaps because of them, the Manitou had a ripple effect. Several modern horror directors have cited it as an influence, not for its success, but for its audacity. It dared to blend mysticism, body horror, sci-fi, and cultural commentary all in one chaotic package. Filmmakers like Panos Cosmatos, Mandy, Justin Benson, The Endless, and even Jordan Peele have nodded sometimes cryptically toward the Manitou's uncanny layering of the physical and spiritual. More obviously, the film's aesthetic flashing lights, ritual spaces, ambiguous dimensions has shown up in music videos, horror games, and even art house experiments. In failing to fit a mold, the Manitou broke one, and horror has never been the same. Was it ahead of its time, or just too strange to die? Bonus fact: The ending that wasn't really an ending. She destroys the demon. The light fades. Peace returns, or does it? The final shot of the Manitou shows Karen, the possessed woman, lying still after the cosmic battle. She's free. The shaman is gone. But then the narrator whispers, "Evil does not die. It waits to be reborn." That's not just a spooky line. It's a warning and maybe a clue. According to Graham Masterton, Misquamicus always comes back. His spirit isn't destroyed. It's displaced. In fact, in the book series, he returns in different hosts, different times, and different forms. The film never adapted those stories, but it left the door wide open. Some horror fans believe the Manitou's ending wasn't an ending at all. It was a setup, a curse passed to the viewer, a lingering presence waiting for your body, your screen, your imagination. So the question becomes, did the story end with the film, or did it just begin with you? If this film left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. The Manitou wasn't just a horror movie, it was a cosmic dare, wrapped in folklore, madness, and VHS static. Which fact unsettled you the most? And more importantly, do you think Misquamicus ever truly left? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us which forgotten film we should uncover next.